Acrocanthosaurus, what a badass sounding name, and fittingly because this is one badass predator that's a favorite of many people. I've ever only had this, and this rebore, and I've been wanting an update. I was just wondering which of the big three it would be, Safari, Collecte, or PNSO. As it turned out, it's PNSO. This is Fergus the Acrocanthosaurus, and straight away you can see he means business. Now this measures 33 centimeters or 13 inches, one of the largest theropods, reaching up to 11.5 meters or 38 feet, puts this model nicely at 1:35 scale. Acrocanthosaurus is one of the most completely known allosaurids. No single fossil had all the elements, but fortunately by combining what we know from each, as you can see in these skeletals by Spino in Wonderland at DeviantArt, the holotype OMNH 10146, the paratype OMNH 10147, SMU 74646, and the most complete fossil so far known, NCSM 14135, also known as Fren, a composite can be put together, such as you see in this skeletal by Francisco Brunen and Dr. Scott Hartman. Acrocanthosaurus means high-spine lizard, named after its tall neural spines, from the Greek acra, acantha, and sauros. Of course, these high neural spines are the highlight of the animal, with the most obvious explanation being a low sail. In fact, it was once assumed to be a Spinosaurid because of this, but it's now considered a Carcharodontosaurid with family members like Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus. Let's go to these spines now. Now there's been much speculation whether they mean a sail or a hump, but whether sail, hump or ridge, we can agree that what it does do is make the animal look deeper from the side, so the functions of intimidation and sexual attraction are possible. And what goes with this visual device would probably involve colors and patterns, and you can see that here. I love the pattern in the release images, and I'm delighted that the actual model preserves it much better than I would expect, including these little eyes. The overall color scheme is pleasing and striking in a subtle way. Especially the boundaries of the markings have a very smooth, blurred transition that is almost has a watercolor stain look to it. Now these aren't the simple stripes we have a love-hate relationship with in our PNSOs, but very much elevated. It reminds me of the patterning of the Grand Canyon rattlesnake. The actual colors are slightly different from the release image. The very nice dark bordering of these stripes aren't on the release image, so it's a pleasant surprise. Now these markings here are lighter than in the release image, which I prefer because of how the stripes would then cross into the body. That's not so much the case here, but it does accentuate the ridge more, if you prefer that. We'll talk about sails and ridges in the science part of the video. There is this linear depression, almost a sulcus I would say. And another little one here, which adds to interesting detail. I also like these little spiky scutes topping off the ridge. How they're individually painted. And also irregularly sized, imbuing them with a very organic look. Right off, I'm relieved that while the release image showed a skull that was far too long and shallow, in hand the proportions look better. Now you see, this has a shorter and deeper skull. and I think the surface anatomy is quite nicely fitted to the skeletal. You have this large depressed area which hints at the large size of the entorbital fenestra, which is a very obvious feature looking at the skull. And the surangular ridge, a common feature shared with Giganotosaurus, shows up over here. Long low ridges from the nasal bones run along each side of the snout from the nostril back to the eye, and then continuing onto the lacrimal bones, a characteristic feature of all Allosauroids. However, these areas in the fossil are less rugose than in Allosaurus, so presumably had less overlying keratin, unlike Allosaurus with a prominent lacrimal crest. PNSO has chosen to give it a build-up in the form of this shelf. Like most of PNSO's theropods, there are no lips, which I know will be distressing to some of you, but is in keeping with PNSO's current view of theropods. The teeth are actually very nicely painted, with some overruns. The gum and the tongue color is a little anemic. Otherwise, the rest of the facial detail is as expected from PNSO, that is to say, very good. Moving down, we can see yet more of the skin detail in the neck. And notice the nice thickness here. Then the body. And on the underside, which is rather plainly painted, it could use more washes. And then the shoulders, just look at that detail. And down the arms. Overall, I like the arm proportions. These are relatively shorter than in Allosaurus. In Allosaurus, the arm can be between 12 to 25% longer than the femur. But in Acrocanthosaurus, the arm is shorter, about 80% the length of the femur. And you can see this relativity reflected here. And then the hands. Now for some reason, many people assume an enlarged thumb claw for all Allosauroids. As far as I know, that's not an established character for the group, though Allosaurus obviously did have them. The 2000 Curry and Carpenter paper on SCSM 14345 restored them like this. Now I'm pretty happy with the proportion of the finger lengths themselves, and I don't think the lack of a large first claw is as egregious as it was in Allosaurus. Now the leg bones are proportionately more robust than Allosaurus, and again you see that here. The tail is, I think, a little too short, and so can give an impression of shriveling towards the end. This Acrocanthosaurus, like PNSO's other theropods, seemingly miraculously stands without the support, but this is always recommended anyway because of warping over time. The pose is very similar to PNSO's other theropods, and here's where I have to say, while there are obviously only a few ways a bipedal theropod could walk, I would hope for something a little different, especially if there's a supporting stand or a base where stability is less of a limiting factor. I'm not saying go Peppo crazy, but there exists a happy medium, such as we saw with the PNSO Alorotitan. Alright, as always before the comparisons, let's get into a bit of science. Sail or hump. So the first thing to talk about is the tall neural spines, which is the most distinguishing feature of Acrocanthosaurus. There have been many prehistoric animals with high neural spines. The sphenecodons like Dimetrodon, Edaphosaurids like Edaphosaurus, the temnospondyls like Platyhystrix, and the pseudosuchians Arizonosaurus and Lotosaurus. Dinosaurs include sauropods like Amargasaurus, ornithopods like Ouranosaurus, and theropods like Concavenator, Deinocheirus, Spinosaurus, and of course Acrocanthosaurus. Because high neural spines in Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus have always been interpreted as sails, it seemed an easy step to suggest that dinosaurs with high spines would also have them. For example, Spinosaurus and Ouranosaurus. In Acrocanthosaurus, this was often a low sail, and indeed it was sometimes considered a Spinosaurid in the past because of this. Many depictions often highlight or even exaggerate this feature, such as in this Peppo and this Rebor here. One of the most influential papers in this is Bailey 1997. In this paper, he pointed out that the tall neural spines of many dinosaurs differ in structure from those of the sailback pelycosaurs. Now you can see that in Dimetrodon here, which has pretty spindly neural spines. They are also subcircular in cross-section, and in some taxa have numerous projections coming off the main shaft. These spines often show signs of fracture, suggesting a flap of skin would be useful in landing support, meaning a sail, while obviously ill-suited for muscle or ligament attachment. However, in dinosaurs like Ouranosaurus, they are a lot more robust, with the tops being antero-posteriorly expanded and then tapering as we move inferiorly. He pointed out the similarity of this morphology to that of an extant animal, the bison. But the bison doesn't have a sail, it has a hump of muscle. And based on this and the anatomy of the bison, he proposed that these tall spines were really attachment sites of powerful muscles, or fat for energy storage, suggesting the presence of a large hump, not a sail. However, there are arguments against this. First, Bailey assumed a seasonally dry and arid habitat for Spinosaurus. You'll still see depictions of this in older books like this one. He argued that large sails would have caused them to overheat, while a hump could act as a heat shield. However, we now know that they lived in wet surrounds, and so have not much need for heat dissipation. This also negated their use as fat storage for energy. Now second, the profile of these so-called humps differs significantly. In the bison, the peak height is in the shoulder region, where it then reduces abruptly as we move caudally. The peak corresponds with muscle and ligament attachment in the neck and shoulder region, and the weight is directly over a pillar of support. In Ouranosaurus and other spinous animals, the peak either lies further back, or the elongated spines go on quite uniformly for a greater distance down the spine, with only gradual size reductions, so the parallel doesn't work. And third, having muscle enlargements throughout the spine will also make the spine relatively inflexible. In hadrosaurs like Hypacrosaurus, we know many of them had epaxial ossified tendons to stiffen the spine. But these are facultative bipeds, tending to spend a lot more time on all fours. So this might not be an issue. It would, however, be problematic for an active hunter with greater need for speed and flexibility. Now fourth, looking at other extinct animals with the same type of neural spine, that is antero-posteriorly widened and inferiorly tapered, the hump theory is challenged considering Arizonosaurus and also Platyhystrix. At their small sizes, it's hard to imagine the need for extra muscular bulk in the apexial area, which would be more a burden than a boon. Given this, it's possible dinosaurs did not have bison-like humps, and sails are a possible interpretation. In general, it seems that with elongated neural spines, those tending towards being very long have traditionally been reconstructed as sails, such as in Spinosaurus and Ouranosaurus. Elongated spines at the shorter end of the spectrum have been reconstructed not as humps like in the bison, but a bit of a mix between sail and hump, along the lines of a high fleshy ridge. This is what you'll see in many reconstructions of Acrocanthosaurus, including this one. Forelimb range of motion in Acrocanthosaurus. Acrocanthosaurus is one of the most complete Carcharodontosaurids we have, including the forelimbs. Center and Robbins in 2005 analyzed the forelimb range of motion of NCSM 14345 to determine how far the joint could move without dislocating in various directions. Now, this is useful for a couple of reasons. For one, it suggests how the limbs could be used, and second, it helps guide realistic depictions of poses. Now, here are some of their findings. Now, indulge me a little, I actually don't have any articulated dinosaurs, so we'll have to make do with some substitute dinosaurs. At rest, the forelimbs would have hung from the shoulders, with the humerus angled backwards just slightly, with the elbow bent and the claws facing medially towards each other. Protraction or forward movement was limited to just 25 degrees past vertical. This means it could not have reached forward to grab prey while hunting, and therefore it reached out to seize prey exclusively with the mouth. In the opposite direction, the arm could be retracted or swung backwards, about 110 degrees from the vertical, meaning the humerus could angle upwards. So the forelimbs could be pulled back towards the body very strongly. And this suggests that once seized in the jaws, the heavily muscled forelimbs would have retracted, holding the prey tightly against the body and preventing escape, or even repeatedly retracting the forelimbs, tearing large gashes with its claws. As the prey animal attempted to pull away, it would only have been further impaled on the flexed claws of the first two digits. Very frightening image indeed. In adduction, meaning swinging inwards, the arm couldn't achieve vertical, so having them straight down like this would be incorrect. But the opposite, abduction, could reach about 10 degrees above horizontal, so perhaps some kind of arm-waving mating ritual. Elbow flexion was limited to about 60 degrees, meaning a 90-degree right angle isn't possible. So while that's respected here in the right arm, this left elbow is too flexed. It also couldn't completely straighten the elbow. Alright, let's compare Fergus to some other theropods. First, Acrocanthosaurus. And we have the rebor. You can see here very clearly the sail, as opposed to this fleshy ridge. Now really, except for this and some proportion issues like the large feet and scales, this is still a pretty beautiful model with a nice paint application. Then the Safari Limited one, for many years my only Acrocanthosaurus, which is still very nice. Now some Carcharodontosaurids. First, the PNSO Carcharodontosaurus. Then the Eofauna Giganotosaurus. and Allosaurid, the PNSO Allosaurus. And finally, my customary Wilson T-Rex. So there we have it. Acrocanthosaurus is one of the more popular theropods. It's nice to have one with a more modern sculpt, with better detail and proportions, except maybe the tail, and most of all, a really kick-ass pattern and colour that's not only nice to look at, but also highlights the possible role of the ridge in display and threat intimidation. Now, this is a model that will really stand out. But one thing PNSO might try is different poses for future theropods. I'm especially keen to know what you guys think about this one, so please let me know below. I'll see you soon with another video.